Historically, there were different engines for different purposes. Basically, the breakdown was switchers, road switchers, mainline engines, and passenger engines. Switchers were engines that were limited to serving branch lines in industrial areas. Typically, they were of lower horsepower, such as some of the engines in the photos here. The CN SW8 had 900 horsepower. Then the CN SW1200, well, 1200 horsepower. Then we've got an Elco or MLW S3 at 660 horsepower, and an MLW or Elco S2 at 1000 horsepower. So that was typically the range of horsepower of the switch engines. Road switchers were basically a hybrid engine serving as both a switcher and as a mainline engine. Now in the switching areas, it depending on the weight restrictions depend on the size of the road switchers. So they also vary quite a bit in size, all the way from basically what was a switcher that could go on a main line, such as this SW1200 RS, or something larger as this GP9 at 1750 horsepower. The SW1200 RS, of course, 1200 horsepower. GP38 had 2000 horsepower and basically was built to replace the GP9s. Higher horsepower engines, such as the GP40, were used in later years as road switchers as well. Usually they are 4 axles, as were the switchers before them. However, there were instances of 6-axle road switchers, with the middle axle not being powered for light rail use, such as this RSD18 that was used in Prince Edward Island. Road switchers are typically used mostly on local freights. They could be used on main freights, but mostly local freights and turns. Turns are basically a local that goes from point A to point B, and then once finished goes back to point A. Such as the Niagara Falls crew was used to switch the Meriton yard near St. Catharines. So they would go for Niagara Falls, go down, switch the yard, and head back to Niagara Falls. Mainline engines were engines strictly used for mainline use. However, like everything else in this world, there were exceptions to that. Now, some examples were the SD40-2, the SD45, or some of these Draper tapers, which was actually originally a CN design used by other railways after, such as this SD50F or the CP Rail SD40-2F. Prior to that, F units were mainline engines. Now, the main reason was that these engines were not very practical for switching due to the lack of visibility. Now, in today's uses, you will see SD40-2s and sometimes an older, maybe SD45 on a short line doing switching, because that's basically what they have to work with. The horsepower varied with the age of the engine. So the older engines, such as the original F7s, were only 1500 horsepower. Then that power ranged up to 3000 horsepower for the SD40-2, 3600 horsepower for the SD45, and ranging all the way up to 3800 horsepower for the SD60, which was a further development from the SD50s on the picture earlier. As the horsepower increased, they were typically 6-axle engines. Now, some railways, such as the Union Pacific, had some monster engines known as DDA-40Xs, which were over 6,000 horsepower and 8 axles. Now, they kind of cheated on that, as it was actually 2 SD45 engines put together. Originally, passenger engines came with a steam generator unit to help heat passenger cars. Now, if they needed extra steam to generate, they would have a steam generator car. In later years, steam was replaced with auxiliary diesel engine to generate electricity for the heat and then also air conditioning. So the diesel engine, passenger engine, would have a auxiliary power unit. Now, in some cases, they would have an auxiliary power car. Some examples of the passenger engines are the FP7 by General Motors, the FPA4 by MLW, and once again by GM, the F40PH. Horsepower ranged from about 1500 horsepower up to 3000. Typically, the engines would be on 4 axles. However, some were on 6 axles, with an A1A, the one being a non-powered truck, for giving more of a smooth ride, such as this E unit. Other attempts at 6-axle passenger engines, the SDP40F, which due to some derailment issues later found out from the storage of the water unit, was discontinued by Amtrak and switched back to freight and used by railways such as Santa Fe and here Wisconsin Central. Also, commuter engines were designed as well. And here's an earlier Go unit, an F59PH. Today, the manufacturers are building basically either freight engines or passenger engines. There are some variations in recent years with hybrid switchers and hybrid road switchers, as seen in these two examples, RP20BD and then a GP20C-Echo. Passenger engines, though, do have two distinctions still to this day: commuter engines and long-range passenger engines. The commuter engines tend to be built for fast acceleration and a smaller fuel tank, as they do not need to go long distances. The longer passenger engines for going across the country, such as the US and Canada, or even longer regional runs, they tend to have a larger fuel tank. Manufacturers have changed over the years. GM, now owned by Caterpillar, no longer manufactures passenger engines. I'm not even sure if General Electric does, but here's a picture of a P42 and engines, both with Amtrak and with Via Rail. However, other manufacturers that get more into the game in North America, such as Siemens, and this brand new Via Charger engine. Some of the secondary railways in that are actually still using older former road switchers or road engines as passenger engines, but then what they've done is they're using an auxiliary power unit, in this case Ontario Northland, running the Polar Bear Express up to Moosonee, is using an XBF unit as an auxiliary power unit to power the coaches. The traditional switch engine is becoming rarer and rarer these days, as basically any that are left are just aging engines from basically the 1950s and possibly the 60s. Road switchers are more common, but they're also aging. And you'll see a lot of them now on secondary short lines, although some of the main railroads, such as CN GP, are still running them. Today's mainline engines, however, are also used for switching, road switching, and mainline trains. So basically, such in this case in Englehart, Ontario, here's an SD75 switching the yard. The horsepower has continued to rise over the years, and today the basic horsepower of a common diesel is either 4,300 horsepower on an SD70 M-2 or the latest ET44 AC GE engine, 4,400 horsepower. That concludes the series on diesels, and in this case, the different types of diesel engines. I hope you enjoyed this segment. Thank you for watching another video in my Railways in a Nutshell series, focused on educating people on railway subject matter. If you like this video and are interested in seeing more of this type of content, please subscribe to my channel. Also, if you have suggestions for other railway topics, feel free to send them to me.